can you hear me? Good morning.
I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes, Nina. Yeah, we hear you.
Okay,
We will
great.
start in a few minutes.
Okay,
Hi,
okay.
hi, Nina. It's Gary here.
Yeah, I see.
Can you see? I didn't know I had a camera on. I think I'm just audio. I can't put a camera on.
Yeah, that for better connection. I see. I'm exciting. Worrying a little bit. If I'm opening some documents and I didn't click share, you will not see the documents, yes? And if I
Yes, that is right.
click share, then I can share my PowerPoint.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So I will share PowerPoint a bit later.
Yes, I will first share a PowerPoint about GPPAC.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember.
I think so we can start since it's 10 o'clock. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our second Peace Education webinar series. Thank you very much for joining us today and for expressing your interest. My name is Kristina Miletic. I have pleasure to be the liaison person for Peace Education Working Group. I'm also regional coordinator of GPPAC Western Balkans, and I work at the Knowledge Practice and Advocacy team at GPPAC. Before we get started with our webinar, I would like to introduce Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict, GPPAC, for those of you who are not familiar with our work. And then I'm going to introduce our expert today, Nina Bagdasarova. GPPAC was founded in 2003 as a member-led network of civil society organizations active in the field of conflict prevention. Sorry, just a second. Active in the field of conflict prevention and peace building across the world. Our mission is to promote a shift in how the armed conflict is dealt with, a shift from reaction to prevention of armed conflict. And how we do so, we work together with our members and we focus on the bottom-up approach and what our local members do and need. So we really focus on what are the local needs of our members. We are present in 15 regional networks of local organizations. And together with them, we try to prevent the conflict. We focus on different topics such as human security, gender, dialogue, and mediation. And one of the topics is peace education. Since 2006, GPPAC members from all corners of the world have been working together to exchange information, skills, and strategies on how best to engage and collaborate with key stakeholders in their education systems. Our members have formed the Peace Education Working Group, which is a very unique working group, bringing together civil society, teachers, academia, and representatives of ministries of education or other relevant government agencies to build the capacity of peace educators, teachers, and civil society organizations to integrate peace education in national curricula, teacher training, and education-related policies and recommendations. I would also like to mention that we have one webinar planned every month where our members are sharing their expertise with you. And here you can see also a picture of our peace education working group of our face-to-face meeting that was held last year in The Hague. Today we have a pleasure to have with us our expert Nina Bagdasarova. Nina is an associate professor of the psychology department at the American University of Central Asia in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan. During the summer of 2019, the Ministry of Education and Science of Kyrgyzstan adopted new procedures and methodologies aimed at integrating textbooks and other school materials with the themes of gender equality and non-discrimination. Nina is an author of the Manual on Gender Equality and Social Inclusion for Textbooks, approved by the Ministry in 2017. This manual served as the basis for new detailed methodology that was developed by a team of experts in spring 2019. And today, Nina is going to present the main educational outcomes in the gender equality and social inclusion, as well as gender expertise and evaluation of school textbooks and learning teaching materials. And lastly, to mention that Nina has been working on peace education issues since 2001. Before I give a floor to Nina, I would just like to mention that if you have any question, you can ask them via chat during the presentation, and then we will read them after the presentation, or you can also raise a hand after the presentation as well. Now, I have a pleasure to give a floor to Nina. Welcome, Nina, and we are looking forward to hear your experiences.
Thank you very much. I would start from the some context, some history of the issue. Last year, it was a big movement within the social networks about quality of our textbooks. And among other issues, the gender issues were also recalled, and people was very unhappy about. People were very unhappy about the illustrations, some texts, some attitudes that our textbooks promoted in this sphere, and some materials were just abusing, discriminating, and impossible for school children. And our Ministry of Education decided to include one more type of expertise for the textbooks and teaching learning materials. Before we had methodological, academic, scientific kind of expertise, approbational results, but we've never had anything that was devoted to non-discrimination or gender equality or something like that. And now this part is going to be the mandatory expertise for all authors, for all publishing houses, and without this expertise, no textbook might be published. So we consider this as a great victory, and it takes a lot of different kind of efforts in different directions, including organizational issues. And if you will have questions, I will describe how we decide this in organizational terms, who is going to conduct the expertise, how it would be, what about procedures of this expertise. But I'm going to tell first about methodology itself, how we are going to, what we are going to use, what criteria, indicators we are going to use to conduct this expertise. And I'm going to share the presentation with you. So here is the table of, I think might be, oh, yes. Here is the table of contents. It doesn't look like that. It's more official. It's just very brief translation that I did before the webinar. But basically it contains all legislation justifications for the expertise, all kind of laws and normative documents that led us to conduct this expertise. Then there is a part that describe outcomes-based education approach, because this expertise will be conducted mostly not by the pedagogues, but rather by experts in gender and human rights field, activists, or some experts who are working with not so much with education, but mostly with issues of gender equality, human rights, social inclusion, and so on. Then there is a glossary for main terminology and categories that we are using in this methodology. Then we describe general criteria for expertise. I will say a little bit more about that later. There are some recommendations how to do it, practical recommendations, and 2 tables of indicators. And I will show you these indicators also later. One table is for indicators for texts, for content, and another set of indicators is for visual materials, for illustrations, for pictures. And there is also comments how you can use and in what way you can apply these indicators to the textbooks. And also concerning procedures, there are some specific forms that expert has to fill to collaborate with author, with publisher, and there is several forms for that, and all these forms included in this methodology as well, and there are samples of documents and instruction how to fill these documents and what you have to do with these documents. I also can comment about that if we will have time. So this methodology based on very well-known 4 pillars from Delors report, and we try to include indicators that concerns learning to know, learning to do, learning to be, and most of all, learning to live together. Our expertise is about tolerance, is about equality, is about non-discrimination, first of all, is about diversity also.
Excuse me, Nina, for interrupting you. Could you please share your presentation with us?
I'm sure. I was sure that I'm sharing. I'm changing slides. You don't see it?
No.
Sorry.
You just need to press on share.
Okay. I will try to do it again. I clicked share. Sorry. Sorry. Share. I opened it from another window. Sorry. I didn't get it. Now, is it working now? Do you see it?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry. I opened it from the window in my computer and I was sure that I'm sharing. So there is a table of content that I described. So there are these 4 pillars that I'm sure everybody knows about. Just to remind you, what we based on. And then we are moving to key competencies that we try to elaborate, to develop for our expertise, because we use this outcomes-based educational outcomes-based approach. And these competencies are about some skills, knowledges, and attitudes that our students have to have graduating from the secondary or high school. So it's some kind of final outcomes. What do they have to know, to understand, to feel, to share, and so on. And these key competencies, there are 21 competencies that we put into our list, and we divide these competencies in several sections. So first section is about main role of social factors in diversity development, because traditionally and in many textbooks and among many teachers, it's like common opinion that, for example, ethnic groups are different because people have some biological characteristics that make them different or something, or men or women, they are different because of some biological body kind of characteristics. And this is the first and very important section for key competencies. And our students, we expect that they will understand and explain the social and the role of social and biological factors in, I missed the word, the role of social and biological factors in gender differences, that they will be aware about social character of racial and ethnic differences, that they will know about social roles and will understand the social and economic factors in formation of social roles. And concerning disabilities, they will understand social and medical models of disability, because medical model also based very much on this biological understanding of disability, like disabled people cannot participate in many social events or in social life because biologically they are not like full, they are not complete. So they have these problems and cannot join other society because of these biological reasons. So social concept is saying us that it's problem of social environment actually, and we expect that our students will differ these two approaches and will understand that biology is not on this first place, that it's very secondary or maybe even not secondary factor that define the life of disabled people. And, sorry, I tried to do it better and again, I failed. So the next section is the role of history in diversity development, because again, we have some current situation and a lot of teachers, they refer to current situations as to something that was that's something that has been forever, that we always had these traditions, we always had this way of life and other kind of things. And for example, women traditionally, they are like presupposed to be mothers, and they have to keep families and other things, and they never look into some historical conditions of how these roles formed during different periods and how these roles looked during the different historical periods. And also we expect that our students after school would understand and explain the historical character and fluidity of gender roles, that they could understand historical character of differences between people with different racial and ethnocultural background, and we'll understand that it was some probably historical advantages or disadvantages for different groups, places, territories, and so on. And also they will understand that contemporary nation states, they actually appeared not so long ago. And this picture of nation states that now is the main form of society's existence is not actually eternal. It was not, these states did not exist before, and we can expect that they will not exist later, forever. So we have to understand when, how, and why these states appeared. And also this issue closely connected to understanding of differences between ethnic and national, how to say, identities and minorities, how people identify themselves as ethnic, belonging to some ethnic groups, national groups, or other type of minorities, and how historically it happened that this or that group stayed living on some territory. And this territory not always coincide with the ethnic, let's say, background of or title of the state. Next section is about inequality, and again a lot of mythology applied to these issues, and a lot of stereotypes about some kind of groups that are, for example, lazy or incapable to systematic work, or are even like intellectually impaired or something like that. And we expect that our students after school will be capable to analyze structural factors, influence of structural and social factors in formation of different kind of inequality. First of all, it's structural inequality between genders, and we still are hearing a lot of arguments like why we don't have many women among Nobel Prizes or something like that. And if people do not understand historical condition of, for example, women's education, they can ask these stupid and irrelevant questions and think that this is kind of justification of, I don't know, male intellectual dominance or something like that. So it's very important to show the historical, social, economic factors that divided people structurally, and they didn't have a lot of choice for their professional, educational, and social development. Also, it concerns regional inequality, because a lot of the whole continents sometimes are considered as kind of undeveloped, because probably people that are living there are incapable to develop their own countries. And for example, the centers of colonial dominance of other countries is not taken into account. And even within our own country, for instance, we have quite strong regional differences, disproportions in development, and we have also a lot of stereotypes about different regions that some people are not capable to develop properly in some regions, and historical and social and structural conditions, even geographical conditions. For that, usually people miss these factors. They don't take them into account. And also, it's important to analyze these factors, information of different kind of vulnerable groups and stigmatized groups that cannot just break the stigmas and join the social, join the so-called like normal society in a way, because they have real structural barriers to do that. Disabled people, LGBT people, poor people, and other groups of people. The next section is devoted specifically to stereotypes and prejudices, because we decided that this is a separate kind of skills, mostly practical skills to develop sensitivity to stereotypes and to try to struggle with stereotypes and try to resist to some stereotypical statements, to be critical to information that is going from media sources and other sources, and it concerns sexist speech or hate speech about different groups, as well as racism and other kind of hate speech and stereotypes. And we also, you will see through our indicators later, that we not only looking into misogynic or hostile sexism, but we also are looking into benevolent sexism when women are not considered as bad. Maybe even they are considered as kind of better creatures than men, but they are fragile, they are so weak, they need to be care of, and these kind of things that we also are going to remove from like common sense, from common opinions. And the main idea of that students should be, let's say, should be accustomed or should acquire the real skills to put individual characteristics or some individuals, person before the group and before the other characteristics that this person like bear, before class characteristics, ethnic characteristics, gender characteristics, and so on, that individual traits should go first if you are trying to communicate with people. And there is also the section that devoted to, let's say, not so practical, but more to the value emotional level of competencies. It's about values, and we are trying to highlight the sensitivity and awareness of students about different forms of harassment, of sharing values of equality, of sharing of forms of behavior that, how to say that, are non-discriminative and these kind of things. So here is like also practical competencies and competencies about values that concern equality. And here we move, what can we do with this? Actually, competencies that are quite, let's say, general results that we will have at the end of educational process. So how we can follow these results through smaller steps, how we can follow these ideas through textbook, for instance. What can we do? And we developed some specific indicators and also divided these indicators into groups and put them into the table. I didn't put it here in the table because it's not, I tried, it was not visible, but I will comment. So we have basically 9 groups of indicators, and these indicators are quite detailed. So the first group is just more even like quantitative, maybe quantitative indicator, and we look into mentions of or representations of women and men among people who are represented in the textbook, and in which roles they are presented. We will look through other indicators. So we just trying to count how many mentions, how many names, how many, for example, if it is about literature, how many personages or main heroes, somebody who does matter in the text, how many women or female or not non-male like personages presented in this textbook. The second group is gender characteristics. Okay, we even may have some balance in terms of numbers, and it's quite a widely known fact that the first wave of gender expertise of teaching and learning materials was addressed to these quantitative characteristics. People try to count how many males, how many females are presented, how many pictures, portraits, and so on. But it's only one thing. We have to look into the quality of these representations. So we may be okay with numbers. We have more or less balanced, or even we may have like more female images or female personages in our textbook, but they representing very traditional and very how to say, some images that will cause this gender inequality as a result. So we are looking as a second group into gender characteristics, how these heroines or these heroes, these personages are represented. Like usually that's soft, emotional, passive kind of female personages, and very active, rational, and so on kind of male personages or representatives. The third group is the family roles and obligations, and again we see a lot of texts of traditional representations of women in the houses, in the households, as housekeepers and males as professionals who are somewhere else. They are doing something important outside of home. The fourth groups of indicators is social roles. We decided to put them separately from characteristics because it's a little bit different thing. The role that prescribed to the gender, for example, leaders are usually represented as male personages, followers as female. Also, there is a lot of negative stereotypes about boys who are like delinquent, they are hooligans, but girls behave in a good way, they are not so aggressive, they are peaceful, and so on. The fifth group is professional occupations that again stereotypically reproduce the same scopes of involvement of women and men, that a lot of professions that connected to engineering, to construction, to I don't know, to drive big long vehicle or something, they prescribed for males, and professions that connected to care, to like nurses, like something connected to homework, they prescribed for educational sphere as well, as very feminine in many ways. These roles of teachers and nurses, nurturers prescribed for women. The sixth group is ethnicity representations. I think that in different countries it looks differently, and for some countries probably the racial representation is also important. For us it's also a little bit an issue because we have anthropologically and visually we have different type of people who are living in our country, and usually we have a lot of Asian type of faces, or we have some personages with a Central Asian background, not in terms of region or territory, but in terms of ethnic background, who are represented in the textbooks. And of course, in terms of how to say, within the nation state is a big issue how much we have minorities represented, how many minorities and in what way we have represented in our textbooks. In our textbooks in Kyrgyzstan, it's like disappearing like number of representations. Mostly all the texts and all the illustrations, they oriented to the ethnic majority, and the students have to study the cultural traditions, the texts about I don't know, writers and poets, and they are knowing songs mostly that belong to majority culture, and minorities are represented in just minimal representation of minorities is there. The next group is the vulnerable groups, and it's almost we count like several probably mentions and a couple of illustrations of people with disabilities through hundreds of our textbooks that we analyzed. When we developed this expertise, we analyzed a lot of textbooks for that. Also, some groups are also vulnerable groups are underrepresented, like it's strange, but we don't have a lot of children in textbooks. We don't have a lot of elderly people, people from remote areas, from different kind of regions, and so on. So, I mean, migrants and other kind of people. It's very, very average type of population that is like ethnic majority of specific like level of well-being. And I will say a little bit later about that. It's not presented as a, it's strange, but especially in the primary school, our citizens are not presented as an urban population, though the majority of our people are living in the cities. And I will speak about that a little bit later. Also, discrimination and inequality, especially in the history textbooks, they don't have proper explanation by social factors, and usually it's not discussing at all. It's just the long line of conflicts, wars that described as political, so-called political history, and how these conflicts result in inequality, and what is the societal structures that produce the inequality. These issues not so much discussed within the textbooks. And the 9 group connected to the previous one, I think a lot of countries faced the same problem. We put this group specifically for history textbooks to just to, let's say, remove some example of textbooks out of textbooks list, because they completely consist of wars, conflicts, some figures of political leaders that were involved in these wars and conflicts. Of course, it's very much male kind of history, and there is no almost is no information on everyday life of people in different historical periods. Very little information on culture, on science, on other things that are really important for development of historical thinking. It's only about wars, only about conflicts. And very similar groups of indicators are for visual materials, for illustrations. And I wanted to say about some specific indicators that we put into 8th group for discrimination and inequality. We include the indicator of pictures that represent, let's say, landscapes or rural areas versus urban and industrial kind of pictures that with people. Especially primary school is suffering of that, but not only. And this trend to represent some kind of ethnic traditional image of the nation, of some so-called traditional values of the nation, it leads to over-representation of some kind of non-existent in our days things and artifacts. There is a lot of horses, a lot of yurts, a lot of mountains, a lot of I don't know, kind of occupations that are not actual today, and we almost don't have computers in our textbooks. We don't have some industrial environment where people are working as workers, for instance, some scientific labs where people are doing some work, or other things. That's if you just look through the pictures of some textbooks, you would decide that this is completely rural country where people don't know cars and planes. They are using horses, and they are just living in the mountains and enjoy the landscapes. That's all what they do, sometimes playing some traditional musical instruments.
Sorry, Nina, excuse me for interrupting you. Could you please maybe bring the presentation to conclusion so that we can also give some space for questions, if that is possible?
Yeah, yes, of course. I just wanted to show some illustrations. It's quite like entertaining. That's, for instance, this kind of illustration from the indicator of professionals and occupations. You see, like, male person is busy with some math, and females are like something artistic, or sports. That's very clear, divided, some sports for girls, some sports for boys. The painful issue is family roles that are still very, very traditional illustrations, and even old illustrations, when we have kind of family that actually we don't have anymore, that people are not living in this way now. All these kind of things, we have this ethnic diversity presented, but in very, very traditional way. Again, boys are doing some repair work, and girls are washing clothes or something like that. So I'm ready to answer the questions. And
great, thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation on gender equality and social inclusion. And I would like to open the floor to the questions and comments. As I mentioned, you can ask the questions via chat, or you can raise your hand. So please go ahead.
Gary asked me a question.
Yes, he had to leave, and he said, my apologies to Nina, who is doing a great job.
Hi, hello.
Okay, hello.
Hi, Nina. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you so much for a very insightful talk. And I think also like it gives so much reflection on the Lebanese case and the Middle Eastern in general, given the fact that we are, let's say, in newly created states with created entities since World War I, and all the implications that it had even within the mere creations that led to conflict by itself. And I think also like in terms of the indicators that you've mentioned, the different categorization of whether gender, nationalistic, diversity, exclusion, inclusion, like people that are really not represented, even like, because if we look at the Lebanese case, which is highly looked at within a Middle Eastern perspective within the Arab states in terms of democracy, but still like we see that there are lots of unrepresentation and unrepresented groups in spite of the confession, like the so-called representation of different factors because of this confessional political system. And I think and I really like would love also like later on to take a really like to read all the indicators and the subtitles that you had, and maybe work on something that we can do along GPPAC with different members that can be interested, and also like the members that are present now in the discussion, to work on those indicators and to come up with a certain study that can build up on how we can approach the people that are not represented, not only women, but also women, people from different backgrounds. And it was also like very important for you also like to shed light on women, how do you say it, like who work at homes. How do we say it? Like I forgot the terminology. Anyway, so also because this is an issue for women from African or Asian descendants who come. I'm just talking about MENA because like I think it's important to shed light on that. But of course, like other participants will hear from other regions as well. So also to talk about what kind of representation we can have to these women in terms of justice and like these women are here for income generating opportunities that they can have. So it's very important for them also within the GPPAC agenda to have a human security to live from fear of need and fear. So I think this is also a very important note. Thank you so much, and I look forward also like for further discussions on this topic, maybe development of how we're going to work on the indicators, on the concept note, for others like also to share their experiences. Thank you so much, Nina and GPPAC and all the members here.
Thank you very much for your suggestion. I think it's very important comment, because actually we, and you can see through the indicators, we can now easily, for example, catch some mistakes or some wrong pictures or wrong representations. But for example, our authors and designers, they permanently, they are asking us, okay, what have we have to put there? We don't understand. What do you want of us? What we expect and what we have to do? So I think it's very important to start discussion what kind of positive or let's say in good sense non-traditional representations, what kind of text, what kind of pictures we can suggest to textbook authors and designers in order to promote equality. So, and we actually almost avoid the religious issues for some reasons, but I think for many countries it's important to show like religious diversity as well, and some anti-stereotypical representations of people of different groups. So I think GPPAC could start some maybe project or some work to collect kind of bank of positive images or positive cases for textbooks that you can actually transform to your local background, to your local context, and include into your textbooks when some non-traditional professional occupations, for instance, or like women in hijabs who are driving cars or doing some important like engineering work, or this kind of things that we can share, and for many regions it's might be applicable in our case.
Thank you very much, Shireen and Nina as well. We will definitely follow up this after the webinar, so thank you very much for your ideas. I would like to give a floor to Lucy for a question, and then I will go to Natalie.
Thank you very much indeed, Nina. That was so interesting, and it really helped actually to see the presentation as well. It made it and thank you, Shireen. I'm partly, I think, adding to what Shireen was saying. The indicators, of course, really reflect a lot of the problems where I live too. I think I wanted to ask a little bit about how we can make change. For instance, I worked with Sesame Street at one stage, and there they emphasized the importance of images. They always insisted, for instance, on having in every picture a child with disabilities or from a different background or something, that the image is so important. So is there something that can be done? I like the idea of a GPPAC bank of positive images and a project, but is there something that can be done more immediately, for instance, by training teachers to bring in other images or bring in other approaches? Is there something that that can address the problems immediately? The other thing I wanted to ask was how much this sort of traditional Kyrgyz imagery that you talk about, how much this is a deliberate sort of promulgation of the myth of Kyrgyz identity. It sounded to me with the horses and the mountains that this is perhaps something that the government actually likes to promote, that it's part of the large group identity, that they expect everyone from Kyrgyzstan to identify with. And maybe they don't particularly want more gender equality or more minority groups or more urban, skilled, forward-looking people. Perhaps they actually want to perpetuate this national myth. Do you think that's a problem?
I think there are several layers in your question, and we can work immediately in different directions. We actually tried to work for many years with authors of the textbooks because they are not forced to put some pictures or some texts in the textbooks. They are just doing something that they have been doing for years. And they continue to do some things and never just think about that. And if you just try to problematize these things, some of them are eager to look for new approaches. Another extremely important thing, this is the Ministry of Education that is ready now to conduct this expertise. And this is partly the influence of donors, because they put this condition for some funds that our ministry have to get, and they had to accept this expertise. On the other hand, there are some progressive forces that are really interested in these changes, and there was a huge public pressure to the ministry about quality of the textbooks, and they didn't try. They really tried to avoid some scandals about that. They really tried to show the will to change, to improve the quality of the textbooks, to make them more contemporary oriented, to more interesting, and these kind of things. And the third thing that you mentioned, the teachers. Teachers are very important figures. And now, for example, when we conducted expertise on, let's say, 60% of our textbooks, and we discovered that more than half of them should be removed from schools. What actually teachers have to do then? They cannot stay without textbooks. But we have this expertise quite detailed, and we know what topics, what kind of are wrong in these textbooks, what illustrations shouldn't be shown to children or discussed differently if you are trying to use it during the classes. So we started to work directly to the teachers and try to help them how to work with the existing textbooks, but also looking for some other materials, or critically use the existing materials to discuss important issues on gender equality and non-discrimination. So it's also a very important part of the work. Of course, it's very slow. We cannot like teach a lot of teachers simultaneously, but still, if somebody start, and in some schools other teachers can join these trained teachers, I think it might be a big progress in some time. So
Thank you. Thank you, Nina, and thank you, Lucy, also for these relevant suggestions on how we can undertake immediately an action. I would like also to raise a question, to read a question that was raised by Natalie about the move towards adding inclusive materials to the curriculum. What are the reactions you have experienced both of children and of parents to these changes in the cases you've been involved in?
Inclusive, you mean in narrow sense, with for children with special educational needs, or inclusive in like some broader sense? We have also now the ongoing reform, or not reform, it's just first steps of implementation of inclusive education also in our schools. And we have a lot of resistance and a lot of problems also concerning that. And this expertise is also the part of the problem, because these children were never visible for other children. They are not represented publicly a lot. So it's hard to expect that they will be welcomed in schools now, suddenly, when they suddenly appear in schools. So we are trying to lobby the more materials about social inclusion in different ways. And for children with special pedagogical needs, first of all, and some specific materials also for them. But actually, there are some discussions now how to design curricula for children of different groups, let's say, and mostly we are trying to implement a universal curricula design when different children can join the topic at different levels and get some skills. But the idea is that you have to understand some different groups of educational results for different children. Ideally, for each kid, you may have designed the individual educational results, but unfortunately, it's difficult in our school system. But at least some groups of children may have this specified programs.
Thank you. We have also a question from Anita. Do you foresee any kind of intergenerational conflict between, for example, between trained students and non-trained parents, which may be caused by parents who are comfortable with the status quo?
We currently have a quite opposite intergenerational conflict, actually, because our generation of maybe even not parents, but a little bit parents, but more grandparents, who were raised during the Soviet time and have very much international, let's say, intercultural and gender equal kind of attitudes to many issues. They faced the new generation of children who are, who support this this traditional turn, and share a lot of religious like fundamental norms. They follow some family traditional roles, and these kind of things. And actually, I believe that we will, if we will start train students in more progressive way, we probably will make this gap narrower. That we have like more progressive and more rational older generation than youth now. Youth is more traditional, more close to innovations, and in many ways is more difficult to penetrate with some new ideas. We have this kind of problem.
Thank you. Dear participants, are there other questions? Okay, if not, then I would like to thank very much to Nina for sharing with us your expertise, and thank you all for joining us today. Please be informed that we recorded the webinar, and it will be available on our website www.gpac.net, and you can share it with your contacts. Also, if you would like to stay updated about our upcoming webinars, please check our website. The next one will be held on 25th of October and will be given by our colleague, Dr. Gohar Markosian, on peace education in Armenia, experience and lessons learned. And I'm also looking forward to follow up your suggestions, and I wish you a nice day.
Denise, just a second. I'm sorry because I lost you for a while. I just want to make just a quick comment.
It was Christina. Yes, please,
Yeah,
Shireen.
I'm sorry, Christina. Yeah, just like also like I think it will be good, for example, regarding the Lebanese case, we don't have a unified history book, and of course it's related to the inter-conflict. So in that aspect, I think extracurricular issues and training for teacher to compensate for the lack of building like a peaceful society, or in terms of peace building within the curriculum and school, can be also like a positive thing in terms of this curricular issues, because sometimes you cannot put it within the official curriculum. So it's also like the role of a teacher to do it like outside the formal curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shireen, for your comment. Then with this comment, I think so that we can finish the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice day.
Bye. You
Bye.
too. Bye-bye.